I'm going to get started by talking about the industrial age, which is defined around the explosion of manufacturing and construction technology in the first half of the 19th century. There were great improvements in construction, in mass transportation, both of people and of goods, and the construction of bridges and tunnels, leading to huge time savings, much of which is still in use to this very day. While the Luddites famously protested elements of the Industrial Revolution, it did contribute substantially to improving the standard of living. It's contributing to improving the standard of living that I'm going to talk about today, although I'm going to do it in the context of our own lifetimes, which is the information age. It's the improved distribution of information through the internet that has led to the most recent improvements in the standard of living. Over the course of this WordCamp, literally thousands of people will download and install WordPress for the first time. Who knows where it will lead them, how it will improve their lives. I'm sure working with WordPress has led some of you to unexpected places. It's certainly changed my life, and that's why I like contributing back. I do this by contributing code, specifically by contributing to WordPress core. And it's important to emphasize the word core on that screen behind me. I am not talking about contributing to WordPress. There are so many ways of doing this that I could not hope to cover them all today. Contributing to core is just one of the small fraction of ways that you can contribute back. Which begs a question. What do I mean when I talk about contributing to WordPress core? When I talk about core, I am specifically talking about the code base that powers WordPress. The code that powers the dashboard allows you to select a theme and write content to be displayed in that theme. Since the end of 2014, I've been a regular contributor to WordPress core, although my first contribution was this in 2011. That is one whole 47 characters. I didn't even crack the half-ton. And this is the same contribution as I uploaded it, but I'm really getting ahead of myself here. I'm getting ahead of myself because when contributing to WordPress core, you need to consider that the code will run on 1 in 4 websites. And as such, any code contributed needs to be considered very carefully before being committed. No one really knows for sure how the code is going to be used. My day job is WordPress engineer at HumanMade, and we build high-end sites using WordPress. We use WordPress in a very specific way, one suitable for big businesses building sites that scale. I was lucky enough to be invited to be a guest committer for WordPress 4.6 and 4.7. And that's an idea I try and keep in mind as I commit, before committing code, that I use WordPress in a very specific way, a way suitable for big sites. But they're hobbyists, bloggers, small businesses, and so many others using WordPress in a different way. And this is why it can sometimes take a little while for code to be committed. It's a desire to keep these 1 in 4 websites running. It's these 1 in 4 websites that have led to the WordPress philosophy. One of the best known aspects is to maintain backward compatibility. Let's move towards writing some code. Development of code, use your words. Development of WordPress takes place on the WordPress core track. The track homepage looks like this, which, let's face it, is pretty plain. But track can be thought of as an issue tracker with a code browser attached. So it helps to go exploring. So let's look and start with the code browser. The code browser is essentially Finder or Explorer, but for WordPress track. So we've got the usual things listed, modified date, the age of files, and so on. But as it's hooked up to a version control system, as you can see over on the side there, it also includes a summary of the most recent change to the file. The next screen I'll take a look at is going to be the ticket screen. it links to the various ways that you can navigate tickets. And there are a lot of ways that you can navigate tickets on WordPress track. But over 37,000 tickets have been logged in the WordPress core track, and around 10% of these are open right now. Once you start participating in WordPress track, a really handy report is this one. It lists all the open tickets that you've shown an interest in. And once you've been contributing for a little while, it can get quite long. But that's okay. At any one time, there's a lot going on in WordPress track. Another helpful report is to see what's going to be included in the next major release of WordPress. And as we're halfway through the WordPress 4.7 release cycle, I recommend you go and take a look at this. Early on in a release cycle, it's full of tickets, but as the release approaches, it gets shorter and shorter. I took this screenshot the weekend after WordPress 4.6 release candidate 1 was released, which is handy because it actually means that it fits on the screen there. Now, I understand that the admin of WordPress track is not the most glamorous part of WordPress core, although it's necessary for the reason that I showed you earlier, the high number of websites using WordPress. Enough about WordPress core track for the time being. Let's move towards writing some code. Development of WordPress takes place using SVN. So to check it out, you run the same SVN checkout command you would for any other repository. The WordPress SVN repo is at the address on screen, and it's recommended you check it out into a directory called WordPress Develop. Enough about WordPress core track for the time being. Let's move towards writing some code. Development of WordPress takes place using Git. So to clone it, you run the same git clone command you would for any other repository. The WordPress Git repo is located at the address on screen, and it's recommended that you clone it into a directory called WordPress Develop. So yes, that's right, you can contribute with either SVN or Git. For many of us, and I firmly put myself in this camp, using SVN can feel a little bit like this, while Git is considered the more modern approach. I really can't hope to cover both today, so I'm going to focus on Git. And once you've cloned the repository, you need to set up a web server to run WordPress locally. And while it's possible to run your local web server using a virtual machine, today I want to focus on the lowest barrier to entry. And for me, that means running a basic web server on your computer using a GUI. And there's a lot of options around, but when I started contributing to WordPress core, I was using the free version of MAMP. Once downloaded, you start MAMP, select the preferences, and set the document root to the source subdirectory, which is in the WordPress repository that you downloaded. And then having set the root directory, I then set MAMP to use the default ports for a web server. And after that, you can click Start and your server is running. Now, I'm prepared to accept that running MAMP or another web server GUI isn't going to get you an award for the most advanced development environment of the year. It will, however, get you contributing to WordPress core in around about 10 minutes' time. So I'll take that over any nerd cred that happens to be going around. The final step is to get WordPress running on your newly installed web server. Before setting up WordPress, you need to create a database for your install. MAMP includes phpMyAdmin for the purpose. You can create the database in your web browser at the address that's on screen. You can then install WordPress on your local computer and just following the standard process for installing WordPress. You visit the address of the site, localhost, and follow the instructions. When it comes time to enter your database details, the database name is the one you selected earlier, and the username and password are both root. On the final screen, you can set up the site details to anything you like. I usually name the site WordPress Develop and use some login details that are ludicrously insecure. Admin and password. Now, I happen to think that developing anything without test data is about as useful as a car with flat tyres. So I tend to download the test data from wptest.io for use in my development install. It's a really nice set of test data, particularly useful for when it comes time to test for edge cases. Once downloaded, the data can be imported using the WordPress importer. I'm not going to wait for this to finish. So finally, you have WordPress installed, a really nice set of test data, so it's ready to write some code for WordPress. Now, there are two approaches you may wish to take for this. You can have a particular enhancement in mind, or you might wish to pick something that someone else has reported as a bug. This is really up to you. If you are looking for a good first bug, a good spot to start is the fairly aptly named Good First Bugs report. But for the demonstration today, I'm going to create a simple ticket to include an Easter egg for any, on the body class for any posts that happen to be titled WordCamp Sydney. And this is the ticket as it appears on WordPress track. And moments later, when I realised that I'd accidentally created a ticket that appeared on WordPress track, this is my apology as it appeared in the WordPress Slack. But going back to my ticket, let's work on writing some code. The code is written by modifying the copy of WordPress that we downloaded and filled with test data just a few moments ago. It's always wise to make sure that your install of WordPress is up to date with the main repo before writing a patch. This is done by running the git pull command in the command line. Now we can be sure that WordPress is up to date and we can start writing our patch. I've got a confession to make. My not entirely guilty secret is that I prefer a GUI for some activities in Git. Again, it's not something that's going to win you win you any nerd cred, but using development tools that make you comfortable are going to help you write the best code possible. So finally, at long last, we're ready for writing some code. And the code is fairly simple enough. We get the title on the first line. We see if it equals WordCamp Sydney, and if it does, we add a class. We add the Easter egg to the list of classes. But there's a few problems with this code. The first problem becomes obvious when we look at the HTML. The code we've written isn't adding one class, it's adding two. And it includes characters that are going to make using the class very difficult. We can fix the actual bug with our code using the built-in functions in WordPress for class sanitization. So we've solved the obvious problem, but we haven't solved the biggest problem with this code. And the biggest problem with the code actually relates back to the railway and the industrial age. It's a massive problem that has implications to this very day. During the industrial age, different engineers planned and built railways. So let's do that. I'm an engineer. I'm going to build a railway. I guess you start by laying one track and then by laying the second. Although I'm a little worried that they're a bit too close together, so I'm going to move the second one out a bit. The trains will be bigger, but we can build fewer of them as we can carry more goods. But now maybe I'm overcompensating. Maybe I should move it in a little bit. See, building a railway without any standards is really hard. So you can see what happened, can't you? Everyone built railways without actually considering what happened at the border. For many years, there were border crossings that required passengers and goods to change trains. Fortunately, such foolishness is behind us, and we now have standards. Those standards are very, very low. And this is what the code, getting back to my code, this is what it looks like in my text editor. I get the feeling it's trying to tell me something. You see, I have my editor linked up to the WordPress coding standards. The WordPress core coding standards are designed to make it look like WordPress was written by one person. It does this by following a consistent set of practices. My editor looks like this because there are a few problems with my code when compared to these practices. The WordPress coding standards call for spaces inside brackets in function calls, so I can remove the errors from my first line of code by adding spaces. So that's had no effect on the warnings for the other lines. That's because there are other problems that need fixing. The inline control structure needs braces. The WordPress coding standards don't allow for inline control structures because braces makes it easier make it harder to introduce a bug down the track. If you need to add a second line of code, you just add the second line of code and you don't need to worry about changing the control structure. Other problems remain. The WordPress coding standards prefer single quotes over double quotes. Among other things, double quotes are unnecessary without the variables being evaluated. But again, it's about consistency. And finally, WordPress uses Yoda conditions for the if statements. We basically reverse the standard order. And these Yoda conditions help prevent errors. If you miss an equals sign with Yoda conditions, your code will throw an error as you're trying to say set a string to equal a variable. It just doesn't work. Without them, without using Yoda conditions, you'd happily set the post title of everyone to WordPress Sydney. As you can see, we've finally cleared out all the warnings, but there's one more slight change that I'd make. I'd alter the double equals to triple equals. In this instance, we can avoid type juggling, so it's just simply wise to do so. The next step is to upload our changes to core track. In context, our change looks like this. It sits within the getBody class function in a file called postTemplate. When patching core, we just can't upload the file that we want to change. We need to upload the difference, which are just the changes we're making to the file. And in the WordPress develop directory that we downloaded earlier, we run the command getDiff. When it's really messy, but it gives us a screen that looks like this. And there's a few separate parts that it's worth taking a look at. We can see the file that has been modified, the function that we're making changes to, and the lines either side of the code that we're changing. And finally, we can see the code that we're changing and the changes we want to upload to core. Looking at the entire diff, I can quickly see that it looks good and is ready for uploading to track for consideration in WordPress core. The next step is to generate a patch for the file for the purpose, and the command is very similar. GetDiff, we output it to a file, and I do so in my downloads directory. I follow a fairly common naming convention when uploading my files to WordPress track, and that's to name the file for the ticket that for the ticket number in question. And if there's a clash with an existing file when you upload it to track just deals with it and adds a version number. On our ticket, we upload our file by clicking the attach file button, which is towards the bottom of the screen there. We then choose our file and upload it. And by uploading it, we agree to license our code to WordPress under the GPL. And however, there's a really important bit of information there. It's our code. You, the author of the code, retain the copyright and are licensing your code to WordPress and to the WordPress community. Uploading a file won't notify anyone, so you need to add a comment to the ticket, just letting people know what you've done. I tend to summarise the changes. You also need to add the keyword has patch. Submitting your comment will notify anyone following the ticket of the changes you've made. At this point, your code will be reviewed by a volunteer with a view as to whether or not it should be committed. And if all goes to plan, it will be. When I spell it out step by step, it seems like quite a process, but you can become quite quick when you get to know the process. And to help you through the process is why the community runs events like contributor days, WordCamps, and so on. So I'll be around for the rest of the day, so feel free to tap me on the shoulder if you'd like a hand contributing code. Contributing code allows you to follow a fundamental rule of open source. Hack the code and give it back. You can follow along in the WordPress Slack to learn the process. But if you don't want to hack core, you can write documentation, either for users or for developers. You can translate WordPress into another language. You can contribute in so many ways. In fact, you're contributing today just by being here, for which I thank you very much.
Okay, any questions here? We've got one up the back.
Oh, by the way, that will be published in about 5 minutes because I've just realised I forgot to press publish.
All right, good morning, Peter. Thank you for your talk. I'd like to know, me as a developer, how can I push some paths to be merged? For example, WP.js hooks is very mature and have been added to the core, as same as WP REST API and so others. So how can we help to push these guys and merge?
So that's all done via the track, and it all needs to be reviewed. So because WordPress has been around for 13 years now, it's been operating on its own infrastructure for all that time. So you can't just push code like you do for GitHub. It's sort of older technology, and so you need to do it all that sort of manual way. But it's because, as I said, there are 37,000 odd tickets open. So, you know, it's not a matter of all of a sudden clicking a button and transferring everything over to GitHub. It's rather more complicated than that. So there are plans to help people contribute by GitHub, but they're sort of slowly happening.
Hi. Quick question is not going to be easy. So as you said, one of the key things for WordPress is backwards compatibility. Now, as we know, PHP 7 doesn't think this way. And we know that the WordPress works with PHP 7. But as we've heard on the last talk, you know, progress is constant. So at some point, WordPress core would have to, you know, think the PHP 7 way. So what is, in your way, the way that WordPress will go ahead with PHP 7 itself? Okay,
so from the first day that PHP 7 was released, WordPress supported PHP 7. But because PHP 7 had made breaking changes, it meant that there were certain sort of coding patterns that you could no longer use, and that did break backward compatibility. However, if you were using one of the earlier versions of WordPress, an earlier version of PHP, backward compatibility was maintained for those older versions. It's the backward compatibility was lost in interacting and upgrading to PHP 7. So occasionally, backward compatibility is broken for one reason or another, but it's considered very carefully before it happens. In fact, that first patch that I showed you, that I uploaded in 2011 technically broke backward compatibility, which, you know, so I have committed a ticket that is one of the few tickets that broke backward compatibility, but it did it for a sensible reason. I didn't make that decision. One of the lead developers made that decision. So it does happen, but it's considered very carefully because when you're powering, you know, 1 in 4 websites, you know, even breaking sort of 10% of websites is, you know, 1/40th of the web. So, so that's why they need to consider it very carefully.
Hey, Peter, thank you. Very nice talk. My only question is, as you were going through the MAMP setup, we were counting the steps, and arguably VVV could even be easier. So I was just wondering why you promoting MAMP over VVV.
Because VVV's easier if you understand and install VirtualBox, Vagrant, understand how Puppet works and how that sort of is implemented. And also VVV takes about 15 minutes to download and configure in Australia. So if you are counting just running the command Vagrant up, then yes, VVV is arguably easier. I, these days, do use VVV. It's the way I commit code to core. I've modified the number of hosts on there, but I don't think that it's easier than using a GUI for someone who's getting started. And, you know, GUIs are nice, so that's why I find it easier.